Welcome to Smoke&Mirrors with Sarah Staerk, the podcast that takes you behind the curtain of the dark art of public relations. Let's see who our guest is today. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us again, or if it's your first time here, welcome to Smoke&Mirrors. So we know this podcast is dedicated to exposing trade and industry secrets behind the dark art of public relations, but today we're delving deeper into the darker, the scandalous, the somewhat sinister art of government lobbying. We're joined today by a true master of this art, a man who has dedicated his career to talking people into things they just don't want to do, a man who has never smoked a cigarette in his life but represented the tobacco industry, a man who has worked for government as chief of staff for premiers and lord mayors, and who has headed many successful political election campaigns, including getting a Conservative pro-development council team elected in one of the greenest, most left-wing regions in the country. Graham Staerk is also my ex-husband, the father of my children, and the man that taught me most of what I know about PR when he ran the largest independent firm in the country 25 years ago. He's still operating at some might say is the height of his professional career after beating cancer 2 years ago and completely turning his life around. Welcome, Graham, to Smoke&Mirrors.
Glad to be here, and welcome to listeners. I'm not sure that my niche career is of much interest to anybody but my closest and nearest and dearest, but yeah.
Well, we shall see. I think it's interesting. So before we start, is being referred to as a master of scandalous and sinister art a compliment to you?
Oh, definitely not. I think once upon a time I would have, luxuriated in any epitaph you could throw at me because, I didn't care whether people liked me or not, or whether I upset people or not with what I did. But kind of care about it a little bit more now as you mature.
Grow a conscience.
Grow a conscience. Yeah, you could say that. I'm both conscious and of my conscience now, and but nevertheless, I think the skill set that you acquire over time is still the same skill set, but you might do it with velvet gloves rather than a sledgehammer, but the tactics are the same. Mm. And as for being a master, I think there's a lot of good people in the industry. It's a funny industry, actually. There's about 300 or so companies registered in Queensland, and 600 and probably 300 companies in each state. Each state now has a lobbying register, and about 600 companies federally. So it's not a big industry, but it's a very important industry, and there's a lot of very, very good players, and it takes a certain kind of character with a certain kind of experience to do it. I think I'm pretty good at the job. I think I go about it in a thoroughly unique way, so I think I'm probably the leader of my own approach rather than the master of the industry.
Yeah. Well, look, we're going to talk about that and, your approach, some of your history and the cases and jobs that you've worked on and clients you've worked with and politicians you've worked with, and also some of the regulations, because it's a highly regulated industry.
It is now.
But first of all, just to give people a little bit of a background, so after I did my degree, I got my first job in a PR firm as work experience in your firm. So, and it was on the days that you were travelling. So it was in the Gold Coast office in Short Street in Southport. And it was one day a week, I think it was, that I would go in and do work experience at a PR firm. I had no idea what PR was. I did a marketing and business degree. I didn't do PR or communications. So I used to sit at your desk. It was the only desk available in the office because it was full of other people. So I had to sit at your desk. I'd never met you.
Was it messy?
And do... no, it wasn't messy. No. And, do work experience from the boss's desk. So it was really strange. And I didn't meet you for weeks and weeks and weeks because you were away on the days I was there. Yeah. So I was working with your team. And then obviously I continued to do that, and I had to work over the Christmas break and sit there for 5 days solid just answering no calls that ever came in because you wanted someone there from between Christmas and New Year. And I met you just after that. And then you gave me my first job in PR. And that was actually as your assistant. So I followed you everywhere in the car. I went to every single meeting with you. And I literally learned how to do PR by sitting in meetings with you and doing strategies and watching the rest of the office. So I think it was quite a unique introduction to the industry, really, because no formal training in communications. And there's plenty of stories about, issuing press releases over fax machines and my first press conference was, my very, very first press conference was the day after 9/11. And because I had no idea, I thought we'd just go ahead with it. I don't know, like we just still do it. So it's just crazy how this has come about.
I said try and turn that to your advantage.
Yeah, you probably did. I think I ended up cancelling it, hopefully, but I can't remember. But essentially, so
see if you could weave
and that was our history
into your angle.
And
that would have been me at the time.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. A little bit of a scandalous, I guess, start to the commencement of our relationship. In these days, you'd probably be in jail for what you did. I was very young, innocent, naive, taken with your power and charisma and passion. And then, we ended up getting married and having kids. And then divorced, but still work together. And I have huge respect for what you do in your professional life. So that's a little bit of an...
Likewise.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So that's a background between Graham and I, because I think it's probably of interest. Can you give me like a 2-minute summary of your career to date?
Had a fascination with politics from a young age and a fascination with the spoken and written word from a young age. The only two things that turned me on apart from sport and surfing and girls. Mm-hmm. Left the Gold Coast when there were no unis, went to Brisbane, did a PR degree with a hint of journalism and political science in the journalism course, and the political science degree were Peter Beattie, future Premier, Wayne Swan, future Deputy Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. And they turned out to be my first two bosses at Labor headquarters in Ross Street, Newstead, and then Pill Street, South Brisbane. Beattie fell on his sword halfway through after some controversy, and Wayne Swan took over. Wayne Swan then added me to a small team that worked on the Wayne Goss campaign for Premier, which returned Labor to power for the first time in 32 years, ending the National Party rule of Joh Bjelke-Petersen. And because of the role and the skills I'd exhibited in that campaign, I was added to the Premier's media unit at 29 years of age. And then after some further campaigning experience and study with Wayne Swan, ran the Jim Sawley for Lord Mayor campaign in 1991. So I'll correct you in my bio, I was never Chief of Staff to Wayne Goss, I was media advisor. Mm-hmm. But Jim Sawley, we won the campaign, and he and Wayne Goss both agreed, the Mayor and the Premier both agreed it'd be a good idea if I was Chief of Staff to the Lord Mayor of Brisbane. There I fell in love with the whole development and property and town planning field. Mm. I even authored the Livable Brisbane Plan, which was the vision for the entire city, and helped kind of advise the town planning changes which have really rebuilt the city. Fell in love with that and thought, boy, after politics, there's really got to be a niche there for someone who understands property and development, town planning, politics and media. So I opened up a business in 95, and 5 years later you joined as my intern, as you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. It was an existing staff member, Louise Wasserzansky, who recommended you because you were her favourite either a friend or a favourite waitress at
we
Hard Rock.
We worked at Hard Rock Cafe together.
Yeah.
And she was, well, I was at uni, I worked there, and it was the best job, I think, ever.
Yeah.
So I was a waitress.
Big tips,
in my
big
Big
tips and short skirts, as I
Yeah,
recall.
they were, but it's funny, I was so naive at that time, but so I was a waitress and absolutely loved it, and she was doing PR. They actually had a PR person full-time at Hard Rock, one restaurant in Surfers Paradise. That's how busy it was, and a marketing person. So to have a full-time PR person for a restaurant, it was an institution at the time. It was crazy. So we became friends, and she introduced me to you.
We were closing.
I used to sneak into her office.
We never used to close down because we wanted clients to pay their fee over Christmas. So we never closed down, but we put a skeleton crew in place.
Yeah.
And you were the skeleton crew.
Yeah, I just sat
physically
there for free.
And metaphysically.
From Boxing Day to the 2nd of... from Boxing Day to the 2nd of January, I sat in that office by myself and waited for the phone to ring.
Yeah, knowing that it would not.
Because like in those days, wouldn't someone just call your mobile phone?
Yeah.
But you were so paranoid that we were going to miss a call that you had me sitting there.
No, it wasn't any paranoia on my part. It was the fact that...
Could we not divert the phones?
We may have, but
It
we
would
were
have been-
paying you. So in those days, there was no such thing as work from home. There was no such thing. So if you were open, you had to have your office open.
You had to be open.
And because clients were paying us for representation over the
because
break,
we were on monthly retainers.
and monthly retainers, that business model required that you be open.
Oh, God. Yeah.
But can I just add just very quickly, because we don't want to, we want to talk about the immediate past and the current and the future. But you joined, and then within a very short space of time, 2 years, you were general manager. You'd moved to Melbourne. You were running a Melbourne office, which for Gold Coast, we had 30 clients alone in Melbourne.
Yeah.
That was the most successful financial partner. I saw it yesterday, by the way. Took a photo.
Yeah.
And most successful part of the business was Melbourne. And then you came back from the Melbourne office to GM the whole business, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Gold Coast. So from 2 years, from intern to general manager in 2 years. And that was not luck, and it was not who you knew, it was talent. And that's been proven by the subsequent career that you've had. So congratulations to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That was lots of fun.
And you replaced Astra Chobo, the immediate replacement for Astra Chobo, who was a great woman and PR operative, wife of Stephen Chobo. Stephen Chobo went on to be the federal member for trade and tourism, and a great operator who started her own PR firm, Shack. And but you did a magnificent job, and you helped me to wind down the firm when reality hit. Yeah,
that was fun. All right. So obviously you got up to the beginning of your consulting career. What have you been doing in the last 15 to 20 years? And what kind of clients have you been working on? Just a very short snapshot.
Well, mid-2000s reality hit. First marriage broke down. Bankruptcy hit as well. Yeah. And I left the game for 2 years to work as a director of a development company, Resort Corp. Yeah. And then when it faced some issues...
Well, I wasn't with you because of your money, because you were bankrupt.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Well, I think we should get that straight.
Yeah. And just goes to show I know a lot more about other people's businesses than I knew about my own.
Yeah.
Having said that, post working for a developer, the GFC hit in 2008, and that then, so I focused on the PR skills of my toolkit up until that point from 95 to 2008. But the PR for development property resorts, that model broke in 2008. Only one developer remained in business on the Gold Coast. The whole of the Gold Coast fell into a deadly recession. Yeah. And when Australia has a recession, the Gold Coast used to have a depression. Yeah. We closed down the other offices, Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And so when Resort Corp struggled, I decided to open up a company focused only on lobbying. the other part of my toolkit that I used to throw in for free if I got the PR, and now I'm a lobbyist who throws the PR in for free.
Yeah.
But my brand of PR is really only crisis management, not profile building and stuff like that, because there is a PR component to my brand of advocacy.
Yes.
We'll come to that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that for sure. Okay, and then obviously personally you went through a battle with cancer a couple of years ago, and really have completely turned your life around since then, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and in business. So do you feel as though, because I think you have, if we're being honest, you've had a couple of bouts of depression, and, couldn't get out of bed, essentially. And that was really sad to see because, as someone who knows what a talent you are in your industry and what a great mind you have, it was very difficult for not only by myself but everyone around you that knew you to know that was happening. And so, it was lifestyle, probably lifestyle driven, a lot of it. But since then, you've completely turned your life around and you're back fully firing now. Would you say your head is clearer and your strategies are better than they've ever been?
Well, I likened my life today to Brad Cooper's Limitless, because it's how I feel in terms of my mind power, my staying power, my physical energy. And I probably would argue that I'm better now at 63 than I ever was at the job.
Yeah.
More disciplined, more creative, seeing solutions where they're not apparent. So yeah, I think so. And just to connect the dots there, post our breakup, I dived into depression and alcoholism for 7 years, and the upshot of that was a vaccination injury, and turbo cancers and dreadful treatment, and which basically then evaporated the alcoholism and the diabetes and everything else I was suffering from. I mean, I was heading to a grave at 65. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And, without going into the woo-woo aspects of it, found lifestyle, spiritual, dietary and other solutions which have changed the game for me completely. And none of it was planned. None of it was planned. It just is.
Yeah.
And so now I don't drink, and I have a very strict regimen, and it's certainly helped me commercially and in every other way, shape and form. So, and I probably wouldn't be able to do the work I'm doing at the moment without that change, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I didn't
realise this was going to be This Is Your Life. But anyway.
I think it's important to give some background, and you have an interesting history. So.
I don't regret the past. If you regret the past, it's no point of regretting the past. Grasping after the future is really what you do in the now that counts.
Yeah. Very true. Okay, so if we get into the nitty-gritty of the art of government lobbying, let's talk just very quickly firstly about its regulation, because I think a lot of people, I think the regulations have probably increased year on year, and a lot of that has to do with probably the property industry and, paper bag payments and all sorts of things. So, and trying to, stamp out corruption in both business and government. Can you tell me the regulation regulations around lobbying. You have to be registered in your state, in your country. You have to. It comes down to like meeting notes and registering every single contact you have with a government representative, doesn't it?
Do you mind if I just step back a bit and explain it? Because I don't think many people know what a lobbyist is. So when you hear about lobbyists, sometimes they'll be employer groups or any collective, an association that represents any collectivised industry or group of people. They're typically called lobby groups, in the purest sense. And they've always existed, employer groups, employee groups, even unions are effectively, even unions are effectively lobbyists, in common parlance, in that any collectivised group that has a peak body who then wants to sell in government, to buy into government policy or change government policy is known as a lobbying group, a lobbyist. And ironically, they don't have to be registered. The registration regime around Australia relates to those people that set up companies to represent entirely third parties. So the professional lobbying class is a fairly recent invention in
how recent
business. Probably it'd be only really 2 decades old.
Yeah.
Right. And it's mainly populated by people who used to be a politician, used to be a political staffer, or used to be a high-ranking public servant, who feel they can guide third-party companies through the Byzantine,
of government.
halls of government. Why? To shape an outcome.
Yeah.
To stop something happening to them or to start something good happening to them. To bend a policy, to get a grant, funds, to build a profile. So, and it's an unfortunate, as a bit of a amateur libertarian, it's unfortunate to see that lobbying needs to exist, and often you'll hear politicians say lobbyists shouldn't exist because people should feel comfortable coming directly to government with their problems. But the problem is, I know hundreds of people that have gone directly to government with their problem, had an excellent meeting, hands were shook, smiles were flashed, backs were patted, nothing happened.
Yeah.
Because there was no preparation on what to ask for.
Strategy.
They didn't know how to hear what was being said, because you're almost like a translator.
Yeah.
You're translating between what a politician or a bureaucrat is saying to someone who has no experience with government, with politicians or bureaucrats. So you're there, turning gibberish into facts, right?
Yeah.
Because the jargon's different, and a smile and a handshake and a back pat is not an agreement.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
in that way, it's very similar to PR, because exactly that. So a lot of businesses will go directly to journalists with no outcome, or and then so they don't understand that, and then they'll come to a PR person and say, well, I went to the journo to try and sell that story and didn't get in. So it's very similar, because it's about understanding the environment.
Well, if you had a tax problem, would you go straight to the ATO, or would you hire a tax accountant?
Yeah.
If you had a property law, a legal problem with a development, would you go straight to the developer, or would you go to a property lawyer?
Yeah.
Some people say that lobbyists don't have a right to exist, as if they're Israel.
Yeah.
But they do, because every company needs expert guidance with the people that they're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
And this whole narrative that lobbyists shouldn't exist, and that governments are open and accessible to everybody, you don't need to pay your hard-earned to some ex-politician or bureaucrat or party operative, in my case, is just a fallacy. It's a much required industry. So let me come to your question. There's different regulation regimes in every state, and Queensland is the most robust by a mile.
Wow.
by a mile.
Wow. Okay.
And a lot of what you mentioned before being the processes of registration and recording are only applying Queensland. New South Wales is getting there. Canberra is still a free-for-all. Like you just in Canberra, you register, right? And you must tell the person you're ringing you are one. They must ask you if you are one, but you then don't have to record who you spoke to.
Okay.
On any website. There's no live recording update about, there's no live reporting.
Yeah.
You don't have to talk about the topic, and you don't have to say who was in the meeting.
Oh, wow. And you have to do that in Queensland. You have to do all of those things in Queensland.
In Queensland, you almost have to tell them what colour the tie was you wore that day. Right?
So that'd take up a decent part of your day.
Well, the interesting thing is for the larger companies have now, in the space, because I'm a single operator, but the larger companies have had to hire people just to manage the communication with the Office of the Integrity Commission, which is the registration body in Queensland set up under an Act of Parliament. And just recently we all had to re-register in a hurry because the legislation got updated again to ban people who might be working for a politician on their campaign and then turn around and lobby them after they get elected.
Oh, wow.
That's now been banned.
Yeah.
You can't work on a campaign, help get someone elected and then lobby them.
And then
that's called two-hatting.
Yeah.
And that dual hatting has now been banned.
Yep.
You can choose. You can work on a campaign and not be a lobbyist.
Yep.
Or be a lobbyist and not working on a campaign, but not both.
Yeah. Well, makes sense.
And they are a great organisation to work with. I'll give a big plug to the Integrity Commission because they're very, very stakeholder focused.
Yep.
And they're very, very good to work with.
Okay.
And it's just the norm now.
Yeah.
So it's just the norm. And my prediction would be that within a very short space of time, that this regime will be copied in all of the other states and at the federal level because they are leading the world in that reporting regime. And look, to be honest, it might be a chore, but who cares? I think the public has a right to know.
Yeah.
Who is asking government for what? Who made the decision, right? And how did they get the access?
So this is recorded publicly on the
within
Integrity
7
Commission's
days,
website or something?
It's called the contact log.
Yep.
And within 7 days of every meeting, you must say where you met, who else was in the meeting, what you talked about, what your aim of the meeting was.
Wow.
Right? Live on a website for everyone to see within 7 days of the meeting being held.
Okay.
Look, and I think, as I said, it's a chore, but I think if you agree with the public's right to know and that deals shouldn't be done behind closed doors, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Can I just quickly add, without making the answer too long, that why is Queensland the toughest regime? Because Queensland's, there were certain circumstances about 15 years ago where ex-politicians were leaving the job, right, then lobbying in that portfolio where they'd been a minister, back at bureaucrats they appointed, getting the benefit, then charging, in one case, $1 million success fee.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That drove the setting up of the toughest regime, which gets tougher by the year.
Yeah.
But that's what drove it, because not every, that was a minority anomaly.
Yeah.
It didn't apply. But every time a lobbyist gets into trouble, new laws are passed and it affects the whole industry.
Yeah.
So the industry is not too happy at the moment, speaking to my colleagues in it, about the level of inquiry into their behaviour. But it's been caused by people doing the wrong thing that they should not have done.
Okay. No, that's great. That's a really good summary. Really good summary. So,
unfortunately, both those two individuals that caused all the problems, both passed away, and they were great men, and they were just doing business, and there was nothing illegal about it. But what it did cause was a clamp. You can't earn a success fee now. So if you get a developer client, and you get the approval, what your monthly retainer that you were able to negotiate is all you get. There's no kind of $1 million payoff or free apartment or any of that kind of caper going on.
Okay. Yeah, really interesting. Okay. So is there a generic formula for government lobbying?
Oh, great
Is
question.
there a step-by-step?
No.
So every single client, every single situation is completely unique?
And every single lobbyist is unique, depending on their background. And remember, I mentioned before, some are ex-politicians, some are ex-bureaucrat, some are ex-political staff, and some are ex-party organisational staff.
Yeah.
And because of their background, they all see the game differently.
Okay, yeah.
Right? I think the essence of lobbying is who you know, but that's not the essence of my lobbying. My lobbying is, it's not who you know, it's who you go out of your way and need to get to know, so that you don't need to know the person, because then it's a favour, isn't it? So it's not that it's not who you know, and lobbying shouldn't be about favours because you used to work for someone and they liked you.
Yeah.
Lobbying, and these days, a minister or a mayor or a premier, they don't make the decision. Independent public servants make the decision, and then recommend it or report back to the political class, and then there's checks and balances in that decision making.
Yeah.
Right, so you can't just lobby a minister without making a coherent case to the appropriate public servants and public officials.
Okay.
So it's really about bringing that all together. But I think the benefit I have that not many people have in my career is that I worked for the party organisation and was trained by the best at that time. So Peter Beattie and Wayne Swan and others like the 10-year Premier of South Australia, Mike Rann.
Kevin Rudd? You worked with Kevin Rudd,
I worked
didn't
with
you?
Kevin Rudd, not for him,
So
but
he
with Kevin.
was
He was my boss at one stage,
Yeah,
he was
okay.
Chief of Staff to Premier Wayne Goss
Okay.
when I was working for Wayne Goss. So, for about a year,
Yep.
Kevin was my boss.
Yep.
And a terrific bloke. Completely the opposite of his public reputation.
Yeah.
Funny, light-hearted, competent, smart, terrific fella.
Yeah.
I caught up with him last year for lunch before he got appointed as Australian ambassador to the US.
Yeah.
And he's still the same old Kevin, but he's just always been the smartest guy in the room. Can I tell you?
I always thought he came across
Can
okay.
I ever tell you a quick Kevin story?
Yeah, please.
So, prior to the 1989 state election, Wayne Swan was leading the campaign team. It included some other famous journalists and party figures, party identities. Quite a small group. I was the party's media officer and I was responsible for direct mail, making the TV ads, extrapolating the market research into campaign armoury and then weaponising it through the different tools. And Wayne Goss was short a chief of staff and advertised, and this guy named Kevin Rudd from the Australian Foreign Diplomatic Service applied, got the job, and I remember Wayne Swan saying about 3 months later that Kevin knew more about politics after 3 months than all of us knew that we'd acquired in our entire career to that date.
Wow.
He was just
natural.
so smart.
Really, really sad.
And that he became Prime Minister, and then now he's the ambassador to the US.
Yeah.
It's no surprise. I mean, the guy is a walk-in encyclopedia. Right?
Yeah.
And very, very smart guy. The jury's out about whether he's a successful Prime Minister. Some say not, but he got there.
Yeah.
Kevin 07.
Yeah, it was a
all of
great
that
campaign.
stuff.
It was a great campaign.
So there isn't one generic formula because, as I said, everybody comes from a different background. I came from party office, then worked in government offices, then worked for a mayor, and now then worked in PR. So, and before I became a lobbyist. So I see the world different than someone who just came from that, or just came from that, or just came from that.
Yeah,
right?
that actually leads into my next question, which is, because I know that the way you lobby, media strategy is a big part of that, and forming and shaping views and opinions, knowing that, hoping that the politicians that you're going to be talking to are reading the news and understanding that the news is powerful for their re-election.
And again,
And so how do you incorporate media strategy into a lobbying strategy?
Well, again, every single situation is different. Can I give you three examples?
Please.
If you're a no-name company looking to get on the government's radar because you're looking to participate in a government funding program, or you're wanting the government to embrace your industry objectives, say you've got an innovative mining idea, and you want the government's policies and approval processes to shine on that idea, but you're invisible to government.
Yep.
You'd build a profiling campaign about their innovation, and you'd run all of that in the media, because can I tell you, every minister, every day they get to the office is a series of clippings, right? Clippings of where they're represented in the press, or what the opposition is saying about them,
or the industry,
or what's happening in the industry.
Yeah.
Because I think most people don't realise that media is the currency of politics. And I'm not sure if that's ever been written down, but that's my view.
Do you think it still is?
Yes, absolutely. Whether it be social media now as opposed to legacy media or traditional media. But what people say about you is of the utmost concern to a successful politician.
Yeah.
Because if they're all bagging you out, right, you're not going to be successful for much longer, right?
Yeah.
So it takes the pulse of the public daily, and it takes the pulse of those who filter your communications to the public, that is journalists and media. So media is the lifeblood, it's the energy of politics, it's the currency of the game. Yeah. So if you're looking to get on the political agenda, you can't do it without being in the media. So you've got that company wanting to build its profile. So when it finally gets that appointment, it's already cold called through the media.
Yeah.
Then you've got people.
So you're kind of softening them up.
It's a softening up process. I don't like it to sound,
Well, this is smoke and mirrors.
But
it's all right. It's all right. It's strategy, not manipulation.
Strategies get known. It's a tactic.
Yeah. Yep.
So then you'll have companies where the government is trying to, for one reason or another, interrupt the course of business. And you're angry with the government.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
And you think the government's initiative will destroy business as usual or profitability, or it could be an existential threat to the future of that business, right? So you'd run a campaign in the media, both paid and unpaid.
Yeah, so advertising and editorial.
Yep. To warn of the consequences.
That's sometimes you see that on, like the page 2 or 3 of the paper, where a business has taken out an ad that is basically a letter, either just a letter to the government or a letter to the community announcing it. I always find them fascinating. Yeah, I think it's a really gutsy, interesting media move.
It's people like us that put it there, right? It's the rest of our industry, both in media.
Because we can't get a journo to write exactly what we want. So, I'm just going to take out an ad that looks like a letter. I think I've always found that a really gutsy, interesting move.
Now, I do both because of my history, but most of the large lobbying firms have a PR ally.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes.
Right?
Okay.
Most of them.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you and I were talking about one this morning that might.
Yes.
Be like that, right? Yep. So they either have it in-house.
And a media specialist.
Or correct, the client would. And the lobbyist would trail a media specialist in through the door with them.
Yeah, okay.
So it's very much hand in glove these days. Very
Yeah, but you do your own.
But I do both.
You do both. So you're a one-stop shop like
release,
that.
You know, devise the ad and do the lobbying. And I like that because, you know, you've got to understand that client, the sinews of the client matter to be able to then write a competent press release or design a competent ad.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like sometimes things get lost in translation between various companies and they don't always hit the mark.
Yeah. I was talking to a client the other week who assumed... I don't think that politicians get many of their announcements in the press. I think they get very few from what I can see. And I think that business and the public don't really understand that. I was talking to a potential client the other day who is working with a politician and an industry body and him, and they're trying to get to a certain result. And he said, "Oh no, well I don't really need to do my own PR because the mayor, I'm not going to say what mayor it is, but the mayor's doing it and he's going to put out statements and he'll just get it run easy." But I just think it's not the truth, because media are not really that interested in what politicians have to say. They'd rather hear from almost anybody else, really. Like, you've always got to have the politician in the room if you're making an announcement or things like that, but they're never going to be the ones that get the headline. Or they do when they're... sometimes, but not always. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's media are a little bit burnt by politicians and what they say, what they actually do and that kind of thing. And they're not always going to get out the stories that they want. Actually, I think it's almost few and far between. I've worked with business before and we've had the exact same announcement go out on... I wrote it for the business and got the government comment, and then the government wrote it for them and they got our comment to add. Totally separate press releases, which is a terrible strategy, but I couldn't help it at the time. Ours got splashed everywhere because it was just a normal business, that it was a really interesting construction industry statement at the time, and they got none. So what do you think about that?
Well, you're exactly right. If the media report politicians every day of the week,
Yeah.
and even in my PR career, if I had a dime for every time that involving a politician ruined the thing, I'd be, you know, I wouldn't have gone bankrupt. So, but the you know, so they report politics every day of the week.
Yes.
They don't want to report business via the lens of politics because they know the politician is just looking for the political payoff.
Yeah.
And that's not what the story's about. It's about, you know, so when you get a politician to announce something for you, half the time the TV cameras, or you'll see it, they'll go off the politician and they'll go over to the
whoever else it might be,
other talking head, right?
Yeah.
So if they can possibly do it, they'll leave them out because they already get enough profile out of political reporting. They don't need to involve themselves, but there is an art form to doing it, and that third thing about that joint, because any company that has their initiative announced by the government, the grandeur and the validity and credibility of that initiative is enhanced by having a mayor or a premier or a minister of the Crown involved in the announcing it. It's like, you know, a stamp of approval. It's like Her Majesty's stamp of approval on your forehead. So, you know, it is an art form, but the media don't like it, but it's still a worthy pursuit.
Yeah. I agree.
So they're the three ways I see the use of media in lobbying.
Okay.
And so when you're running a lobbying campaign, you can't do it without media, in my view. And when you're doing them, and media campaigns for the kind of media campaign you run for a lobbying advocacy piece always tends to be newsy. So, because you tend to pick up these jobs where, they're not just the profiling piece, which is the third example, and it's not just the calling card of raising a profile. Normally it's about when shit hits the fan. Yeah. And you've got to bend the government over as best you can in the press. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Now, but not so far that they won't then meet with you and work on the solution. Yeah. So then comes the nuance. It's not just a free-for-all, swing for the fences, belt the government into submission. It's encouraging, I always tell clients, do it more in sadness than in anger. We're disappointed in the government. If only the government had realised the full intent of its actions, it wouldn't have done this or it wouldn't have done that. Not that this government is incompetent and should be voted out at the next election. The industries that do that shit, right, pardon the French, the industries that pull that rein, right, then don't get the meeting to fix the problem because they abuse the government and try to lose its votes. Yeah. So you never want to lose a government votes with a whinge in the press, but you can encourage it to do better. Yeah. And that's where a full understanding of the political dimension of your behaviour is required, because people misunderstand the difference between party and union and government and factions and bureaucracy. When you talk about government, that's broken up into that. Yeah. Right? There's the party organisation to put the government there. There's the government, there's the minister's office, the ministers, the senior staff, the senior bureaucrats, the decision-making bureaucrats. So there's no one big amorphous thing called government, right? And you've got to be very careful that you know who you're targeting and what the purpose of that communication is.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so just getting into more detail about examples of clients and that you've worked on before. I always think that it's really interesting, your relationship with tobacco industry, and it makes me think of that movie, is it Thank You for Smoking, that movie? Yeah. So can you tell us a bit about what you did, why the tobacco industry hired you and what you were there for and the result of that?
Well, God, that's 28 years ago.
It was still
smoking
cool.
was cool.
It's like being hired for the vaping industry now.
Yeah, which I wouldn't do.
Yes, but you're a different kind of person now. But so back then, tell us about your experience then.
Well, I left my last political job as Chief of Staff to the Lord Mayor of Brisbane. Yep. And I was going to specialise in problem solving from the media perspective for the property industry. But to learn the ropes, I went to work with a leading practitioner in Brisbane. Yep. And the Tobacco Institute of Australia was his client. So it wasn't my client, it was his client. And he said, would you mind looking after it? So it's not that I had a choice.
Okay, yeah. So how old were you then? 30, around 30?
27.
Oh,
37.
Wow.
37.
37.
37.
37, okay.
37. So I didn't have a choice. I inherited it as a part of, I decided to learn the ropes because I didn't know how to run a PR firm. Yeah. So for a year, I worked with a leading practitioner in Brisbane and to learn the ropes, right? 'Cause I didn't have a clue. And the tobacco industry, a guy named Brendan Brady from Ireland was the chief executive of the tobacco industry. And I don't know what we'd been doing for him before then, but I had a very clear idea about what to do. And so what was the goal?
What was the problem you were
The goal
with?
was they knew, and now we fully know that the worldwide tobacco industry knew it was poisoning and killing people, deliberately through the addictive parts of the nicotine and all the other stuff. Right? They knew that, but what they wanted, but what they'd always said to government was, "Well, you tax the living hell out of us, So why would you destroy your own tax base, number one? Number two, working class people smoke, gamble and drink. You're not taking gambling off them and you're not taking drinking off them. Why would you take cigarettes off them?
Yep.
And thirdly, smokers vote. Right? So that
So
was...
what government was in at the time? State?
It was different colours of government
Yep.
around the states.
Okay.
And so I picked up the national work to work with the tobacco industry. Now, Tobacco Institute was paid for by Philip Morris, being the worldwide leader in tobacco, and British and American Tobacco, or WD and HO Wills, that used to do Winfield and Marlboro and all of that, right? The big brands, right? And a couple of other small tobacco companies. They then funded an industry body, which was a lobbyist, to answer your very first question. But the lobbyist needed a lobbyist because he didn't know anyone in government. He was Irish.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? And they didn't really know what to do. Okay. And I was fresh out of politics. I said, I know what to do.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't guarantee you that it'll work. They said, no, we just want to delay anti-tobacco laws. We know that
Until after election.
They always knew as long as possible,
Yep.
so they can keep making the profits that they make. So they always knew they would end up being a pariah with lung cancers on the back of packs.
Yep.
But back then there was still normal branding that you could buy off the shelf at full view of kids and all that kind of stuff. There was even an argument that passive smoking, whether it even existed.
Just a very quick story. I was out to dinner with my partner and his kids and our kids a couple of weeks ago, and he's Swedish.
Have you met someone else?
Oh God, yeah. And he's Swedish, and over there they start smoking really early. And all the kids at the table were talking about how, there's vaping in the toilets and the kids are getting caught in the toilets vaping and, and it's so bad and the school shouldn't allow it and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, shouldn't there just be like a designated smoking zone in the school? That's what they have in Sweden.
All right. Yeah.
In primary school, high school, they've got several dedicated smoking zones in the schools where the kids can go and have their lunch, and then they just go over there and have their cigarettes. And he was genuinely perplexed as to...
This is Johan, your partner.
Yeah. Why don't they just have dedicated smoking zones? It was hilarious. It was hilarious.
Because kids aren't supposed to smoke, dude.
Yeah, but everyone smokes over there. Or does snooze or whatever.
I thought the People's Republic of Sweden, the Socialist People's Republic of Sweden, would have wiped out smoking in the way Australia did, way earlier.
Well, no, I don't know if they did that, but snoozes and nicotine addiction and you can't talk to a Swedish person and them not know what snooze is, let alone have snooze. And snooze is now popular globally. It was on Joe Rogan the other day. Everyone's talking about snooze now. Because they're trying to rule out vaping, obviously, so now they're trying to bring, we've all got our addictions. People just like to be, we're all dopamine addicts, right? So anyway, I thought that was genuinely perplexing, that smoking.
So back in the mid-90s, I said, look, I agree with the tobacco industry. I wasn't a smoker.
You've never had a cigarette. This is what I think is really interesting.
And that was to my benefit, and I'll tell you why. I used that in every meeting.
Yeah.
Every meeting.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because sometimes people would start with that, well, do you smoke? They were trying to get one up on you. No.
Yeah, okay.
And that's the whole point.
Yep.
That people should be free to smoke or not.
Yeah, okay.
Right, yep. So I use that whole premise that I don't smoke, but I agree with people's right to. So it was about freedom of the individual. So I decided to repackage their argument to take advantage of the points they thought they understood, which was, one, the government makes a fortune out of tobacco taxes, and as long as those tobacco taxes were linked to then health outcomes, reinvested in health outcomes, that's a positive. Like create something bad to fix. Anyway, two, that well, 2 and 3 are kind of the corollary of each other, that smokers vote.
Yep.
And that if you're going to let alcohol and the horses, the GGs, gambling on the GGs stand, why wouldn't you let the other third leg of the trifecta stand? Why just outlaw one? Isn't that unfair that you would target one industry? And don't tell us that grog doesn't kill you, because it does.
Yeah.
And don't tell us that
and that
poverty,
covers the health bill aspects of it, because it's alcohol too.
So I said, okay, good arguments. I said, I can work with that.
Yeah.
Good arguments, right?
Yeah.
And we'll run that and wrap it all in freedom of the individual, and warn them about the consequences of taking ciggies, durries off the people that vote Labor. Mm-hmm. So when we would meet with a Labor governor, and we then had a strategy for each state and territory.
Okay.
And every month we would roll into a different, I worked with them for 3 years, we'd roll into a different city, a different state, and we would, don't look at the camera, Sarah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to tell me it's a 1 hour. Okay. We'll wrap it up soon.
Okay, so we'd roll in and out of various cities, and what I'd do is we'd go and see the editors of the newspapers, we'd go and see the news directors of each TV station, we'd go see the Premier, the Leader of the Opposition, the Shadow Minister, the Responsible Minister, the head of the union movement, everyone. This great list of people who would have some kind of say in how smoking is communicated. Mm-hmm. Right, or governed or policed, and tell them that, look, you've got your argument with it as a product, but it's still legal. You're not cracking down on anyone else, and we just like to think that, until there's further research, that the laws stay where they stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that was my career highlight, because, it was it was never. I've been smashed in the press more times than I've had hot dinners, but it was never for that.
Yeah.
I got smashed in
the
the press.
So what was your career highlight then?
Career highlight?
Or another way of saying, I think relevant to this topic, is what was your hardest job and the most rewarding win? Something maybe you didn't think you could win, but you did, and how did you do it?
I think my career highlight, in just general terms, was getting Jim Sewelley elected as Mayor of Brisbane against a super popular incumbent, and he went on to be undefeated 12 years later.
12 years, yep.
And setting him up for that long-term victory.
So he's Brisbane's longest-serving Lord Mayor?
And undefeated, the Rocky Marciano of Australian politics.
12 years?
Yeah.
Yep.
And undefeated, 4 terms. Never happens, right? Tom Tate's on his way.
He is. And what are the laws in this country? Are you allowed to do 16 years?
Or you
have to bow out?
No, you can do as long as you want.
Okay.
No term limits yet in Australia, but I think it's on its way.
Okay, all right.
So that was great.
There's one thing that I really, that I can't miss asking you about is the Tweed election campaign.
Yeah.
And I think that in the time that I've known you, I think that was the most interesting election campaign that you've been involved with, because obviously the Tweed region is a green region. It's just above Byron Bay. So it's a very similar kind of political environment down there. And it's traditionally had a very left-wing green council, and a developer came to you and wanted to change that because he wanted to develop in the region, and he and you as a group ran a campaign, and it was the dirtiest campaign I've ever seen. And something you've always said is, if you're behind in the polls, you attack the opponent. If you're ahead in the polls, you spread your positive messages.
You still define the other side, no matter what, no matter
So
where.
can you quickly just explain that process of that Tweed campaign, the nasty ads that were done, and then didn't you end up just winning by 30 votes? They had to do a recount.
7.
You were by 7 votes. They had to do a recount. It ended up at an inquiry in court in
Royal
Sydney.
Commission. Yeah.
So just in a few minutes, if possible, because we do have to wrap up, explain that. And I think it's...
You know, I said there's no regrets.
Did you say no regrets?
I said earlier.
Did you?
That you shouldn't, spend all your life regretting everything you've done.
Okay, yeah.
And I've made more mistakes than most. But if I had my time over again, I wouldn't have become involved.
In that campaign.
Because of the long-term ramifications for my reputation. Even today, it still is on my SEO.
Yep.
Even today, I'll be out somewhere and someone will say, "Oh, how about that tweet thing?"
Yeah.
That's 20 years ago.
It was iconic. It was iconic.
And the worst thing is that we set up a third-party campaigning organisation as if it was a political party. So a bunch of developers, all of the developers in the Tweed, from Don O'Rourke's Consolidated Properties to dear departed Brian Ray Group, to Bob L's Leader Group, to Resort Corp, Paul Brinspeed's Resort Corp, and 10 or so Usher Power, Phil Usher's Usher Power Company.
Yeah.
They all funded what turned out to be a $2 million campaign in a 30,000 voter region. Jeez. Per capita, it was the highest spending campaign ever in local government history. And why we thought that wouldn't come to notice of authorities who would be so appalled that a development, cohort would do that and be perceived as only doing it to control development outcomes at that council. That we were so blind that we wouldn't see the consequences for that. I mean, but there was so much ego going on. And just because we could do it didn't mean that we should have done it. But, a great friend of mine was driving it.
I'd love to see. Have you got that ad?
Yeah.
If you can find that ad, send it to me and I'm going to play the clip.
A great friend of mine.
I just can't even believe it went to air.
Yeah. I made all the ads and all the print ads and even made some of the other candidates. Even before there was kind of the ability to do deep fakes or whatnot, I was making people look cross-eyed in their...
I know,
and all of that kind of stuff. And making them look, incompetent. But
we're going to have to dig it up.
Yeah,
and
I'll wrap it up. But bad mistake.
No, I mean dig the ad up. We're going to have to dig the ad up.
A bad mistake because the Labor Party that trained me decided halfway through the campaign to run a team, but I'd already been engaged by the Liberal National Party to run the business campaign.
Okay.
And I effectively was then excommunicated by the Labor Party for that behaviour. And then a Labor Party state government called a Royal Commission into it on the basis of some criminal allegations. We were accused of criminal behaviour, which we weren't, which we didn't. It was just there was a particular minister in the state Labor government that was making a habit of sacking Conservative councils, and when he saw how this one was elected, he sacked it.
Okay. Yeah.
But we ran a brilliant campaign. We won the last majority position on council by 7 votes. I had to fly down to Sydney to the recount. I had all the people I knew in the Labor Party calling me traitor and all of this because I was there scrutineering. But the worst decision of all was allow the campaigning entity to be named something that sounded like my company, which was Tweed Directions, and my business was called Winning Directions. People thought it was a subsidiary of that. The inquiry was held into Tweed Directions, and it destroyed my business, and I went bankrupt.
Yeah.
So if I had my time over again, would never have touched it with a barge pole.
How long was that counselling?
I would have resigned the commission as soon as I found out the Labor Party was running against me, and I wouldn't have run the brutal campaign that I did, which humiliated the Labor Party and the Green Left in the Tweed.
How long was that particular? Because you ended up winning the campaign.
We won by 7 votes.
And the Conservative Pro-Development Council was in?
For a year and then got sacked.
And then got sacked?
By a royal commission.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, and we were all dragged in to give evidence. You were there that day.
Yes, I was there.
And I was so nervous. I'd drunk a quart of vodka in a water bottle, so no one could tell.
That morning, yeah.
And
you were sweating like a pig, I remember.
Like a pig, and I picked a fight with the judge, the commissioner. And I said to him at one stage, if you promise, I'll promise not to teach you about geography, because you're a geography professor, aren't you? If you promise not to tell me about politics. I could have been jailed for contempt. And the bulletin the bulletin ran a front page paper the day, me on the front page the day after, hot, sweaty and fat and alcoholic me, pointing at the judge under the banner, Mayor Maker fires up. And that's how I got the nickname Mayor Maker.
Yeah.
From the editor, Bob Gordon.
Yeah, because you'd run that current
in
Ron
parallel,
Clark's mayor.
I ran
you'd run his
with
successful
you. We
campaign.
ran Ron Clark's successful campaign at the same time.
At the same time, yeah.
And then there were features in the Australian, the Courier Mail, the Fin Review, about us successfully doing that, which then turned to horrific coverage.
Yeah, and then every story run about you since has mentioned that.
Yeah.
That's why it's no publicity. They're saying all publicity is good publicity is just not correct. It's not correct.
I picked up a job in Melbourne the other day because I fought the good fight there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I'd say with the passage of time,
the
heat's gone out of it.
Yeah.
I still deal positively with the Labor Party. I still deal positively with the Conservative Party. People forget, but nevertheless, it was a mistake.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on. That was great.
I hope it didn't sound like this is your life, did it?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's been really interesting. Really interesting. It's a fascinating career path that you've had, and a fascinating job that you do every day. That
I've never been bored.
No.
And I used to think boredom was the enemy of life.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes I would do things just for the goddamn hell of it.
Just for the dopamine rush.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're probably all guilty of that.
I get my thrills elsewhere now.
Oh, good. Well, I don't want to hear about that.
On the yoga mat.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks.
And
see you next time.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Smoke and Mirrors. It takes a village to pull a professional podcast together. If you found value in today's episode, myself and the team would much appreciate your support via a like or comment for the episode, a quick subscribe to the series, or sharing the content with others who may find the discussions of interest. I'd like to thank my range of incredible guests, the production team at Focal Media. Without their talent and support, this podcast would not be possible.